Native American Social Issues by Jenny Walker. Within the U.S., Native Americans are the most economically disadvantaged communities. That is mostly because most natives are unemployed and jobless. In the first half of 2013, the American Indian unemployment rate was 11.3%. American Indians have endured 5 years of unemployment rates over 10%. Compared to unemployment rate for the white population, there is a high ratio. Due to this issue, Native Americans are becoming more poor, living in poverty. There is not much wealth within the population, and the only thing they will depend on is an economic recovery. Though unemployment may not seem possible to find a solution, there is a way of improving the situation rather than it becoming worse. The government's use and assistance is one way of addressing the problem. Another way of addressing the issue is infrastructure investment. In an article about economic recovery, it says infrastructure investments can create millions of jobs. Today, the cost of these projects are relatively low. Wisely done programs can also target some job creation to high unemployment American Indian communities. If jobs are created, Native Americans may have the potential to become unemployed. It will also save them from living in poverty. Because the Native American population is slowly decreasing as more cultures are developing within the U.S., their culture is also decreasing. This is one of the biggest obstacles Native communities need to face. It is hard for Native Americans to spread their language across the U.S. It is also difficult for them to carry their traditions and religion onto their descendants. The reasons why their language is slowly dying is because back when European settlers had moved into the U.S., Native American students would be punished if they spoke their native language in school. Many young people are discouraged from speaking their tribal languages and pressured to leave traditional community values of the glamorous, fast-paced world that exists in movies and media. Along with the Native American language, there are other languages slowly dying in the U.S. One of the main reasons old languages become extinct is because they were not able to be passed on to the next generation. Others have failed at passing their culture onto their children. Luckily, there are organizations out there that are willing to preserve endangered languages. One organization called Living Tongues documents languages with photos and recorded audio. In an online article, it says by using appropriate written materials, videos, still photography, audio recorders, and computers with language software, as well as access through the internet, where possible, their Enduring Voices project will help empower communities to preserve ancient traditions with modern technology. One of the most problematic issues within Native Americans is discrimination and violence against Native women. It is said that the violence mostly comes from outside the Native community. The nonprofit Mending the Sacred Hoop, citing 1990s data from the CDC and the Department of Justice, reports that over 80% of violence experienced by Native Americans is committed by persons not of the same race, a rate substantially higher than for whites or blacks. Many cases of sexual abuse against Native women become unreported. The violence is mainly pointed on them because of either a breakdown in their family or their location. One of the main problems when there is violence and discrimination against Native women is that these crimes become unreported. Native women decide to not speak up about their situation and instead suffer. An organization called the Center Safe Women is a project created to end all violence against Native women. This organization wants to help provide advice and help Indian nations protect and defend themselves from people who will threaten them, raise awareness to gain strong federal action to end violence against Native women and children, and provide legal advice to Native women's organizations and Indian nations on ways to restore tribal criminal authority. The first main issue Native Americans faced during the westward expansion was a loss of their land. Because of the War of 1812, it had a great impact on the native tribes. President Andrew Jackson had created the law where tribal communities were to be stopped. Native Americans were forced out of their homelands and had to move to southeast. But the government was slowly stripping away their land, leaving them nowhere to go. Losing Indian lands resulted in the loss of cultural identity as tribes relied on their homelands as the place of ancestral burial locations. When President Andrew Jackson had introduced the law where tribal communities were to be removed from the U.S. under the Western law, this was called the Indian Removal Act of 1830. In cases where this failed, the government sometimes violated both treaties and Supreme Court rulings to facilitate the spread of European Americans westward across the continent. Because of this act, Native Americans had been stripped away their land. White settlers had argued that Native Americans were the main obstacle towards westward expansion. They signed petitions towards the federal government to remove Native Americans from their land. Because Native Americans were forced out of their tribal communities, they were also influenced to become like the white settlers. They had started to give in and settle into their culture rather than their own. They started adapting to the English language, where assimilation had taken over the native population. This loss of identity corresponded with the rise of American hegemony felt in every facet of tribal communities following the War of 1812. Native language slowly gave way to English. Mandatory American boarding schools forbade native languages to be spoken. Because Native Americans were starting to become assimilated, their traditions and languages had begun to start dying. Between the issues Native Americans have faced during the westward expansion and the current issues they face today, there are some similarities. One similarity is that during the westward expansion today, Native Americans are still facing a loss of their language and traditions.